Every day, something dramatic happens in the Caribbean that affects our lives. We'll give you the details. We'll give you the facts on Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Host Eddie Frederick.
So glad you can join us. Trade and economic growth in the midst of a supply chain issue discussed at the Summit of the Americas. This story takes the lead in today's edition of Caribbean Perspective for Monday, 13th June 2022. Details when we return.
Hubbard's Multi-Department Mount Gay and Hubbard's Tire Bay, located at the Building Supplies Compound in Grand Anse, are reminding the motoring public that another round for licensing and inspection has begun. Just arrived on new shipments of quality furrowed and torque tires to fit all makes and models of vehicles at competitive pricing. Shop early to avoid the hassle of long lines. WhatsApp them on 473-405-5482. Hubbard's, quality service, affordable prices.
Welcome back. Trade and economic growth were high on the agenda as leaders of the Americas convened on Los Angeles last week.
This week's Summit of the Americas takes place amid continuing global supply chain problems, which President Joe Biden will address at the Port of Los Angeles on Friday.
This is really a spectacular golden opportunity.
Economic policy analysts say the solution to those problems lies in a concerted effort to shift manufacturing and shipping away from Asia to neighbors of the U.S., the so-called friendshoring of supply chains.
We could be talking about several millions of jobs that could move into those countries linked to supply chains, and that would be transformative in those economies.
But unlinking the existing supply chain would not be easy.
Will require both the hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure. And what do I mean by soft infrastructure? Governments, the policy, the trade policies would have to align to adopt the new ways of looking at things.
Relations between the U.S. and countries like Mexico, whose president has decided not to attend the summit, are tense. Even if the political goodwill for more trade integration could be found, the job of building a vast industrial infrastructure and port facilities would take many years and hundreds of billions of dollars. But if friendshoring were realized, it would have benefits far beyond improving the fragile supply chain. It could reduce poverty and migration, curtail criminal gangs and narcotics trafficking.
In related news, Prime Minister Mia Mottley, the region's foremost leader, challenged the leaders of the Americas to build joint platforms for procurement to reduce the price of critical goods for the people of the hemisphere. Sandy Dean of Barbados Today has more.
As she addressed the 9th Summit of the Americas, Motley noted this is a critical move for small states in light of global supply chain difficulties.
It's wrong that Cuba and Venezuela, Nicaragua are not here because, as you heard from Bahamas, that we need to speak with those with whom we disagree. And we don't only need to narrowcast. That's the part of the problem of the world. There's too much narrowcasting instead of broadcasting. There's too much talking at instead of talking with. But secondly, those countries must equally recognize that you cannot want to fully participate if you're not prepared equally to engage and to see progress. And the simple priority must be people, not ideology. If we can make progress for people, if we can allow people to speak different languages, if we can create a minimum floor of education and healthcare for the people of the Americas, then, my friends, the City of Angels would have played its role in the history of the Americas.
Before she ended her speech, the Prime Minister added her voice to concern about the exclusion of Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua from the meeting, stressing the need for dialogue. She made clear it should not have happened.
And why? In the Caribbean, we make an order and they say, what? That's too small for us. We announced a tax holiday for electric vehicles. We cannot get the supply of electric vehicles. Will Brazil help us? Will India help us? Will the United States or will Canada help us? We can't get access to batteries in order to help us become net zero by 2030. But yet we want to come on these platforms and talk about it. These are the real problems that I hope PAC 2030 will allow us to solve. And when we finish with PAC 2030, Canada and Chile and all of the others, can we create that platform for that joint procurement to reduce the price of supplies and to guarantee access to our people?
In the meantime, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Keith Rowley, has called for inclusion for all nations of Latin America and the Caribbean at the 9th Summit of the Americas. More in this TTT News item.
The Prime Minister on Friday delivered a national statement at the second plenary session of the 9th Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles, California. Dr. Rowley noted that Trinidad and Tobago was one of the smallest nations to host the Summit of the Americas, the 5th summit in 2009. He said, though small does not mean insignificant, and he noted that the practice of democracy is neither a cloistered virtue nor an automatic one-shape-fits-all.
As we wish for others, and as a proud member of the Caribbean community, we hope that such respect and regard would be afforded to all states within our hemisphere, including Cuba and Venezuela. The path of exclusion and sanctions has not been effective in the past and has brought us no closer to the goal of an Americas which is equitable for the ordinary citizens of our hemisphere, no matter where they live.
The Prime Minister said he believes the greatest opportunity that the Summit of the Americas provides is the opportunity to rebuild trust, first in democracy, then among democracies, and ultimately within democracies, in the Western Hemisphere of countries with diverse histories, economies, politics, and societies. Dr. Rowley said if we are all to end up in that same safe place, the journey must not be truncated, and we may have to help some of our brothers and sisters along the way, but we must never abandon them.
Accept without worry what is happening in Haiti as a normal existence for the population there. We who have put man on the moon and created the internet, we should be able to bring some relief to Haitian lives within these Americas. This week, we celebrate for the 9th occasion within the framework of the Summit of the Americas process, our collective commitment to multilateral cooperation as a necessary platform for the preservation of peace, the promotion of productivity, and the pursuit of prosperity in the Americas.
And Trinidad and Tobago is among 17 countries to benefit from nearly $103 million in humanitarian assistance from the United States for Venezuelan migrants. U.S. President Biden announced at the 9th Summit of the Americas nearly $314 million in new humanitarian, health, economic, and development assistance for Venezuelan refugees and vulnerable migrants across the hemisphere. This assistance includes nearly $103 million from the State Department's Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. This new funding through PRM supports a wide range of life-saving humanitarian programs for Venezuelan refugees and migrants, such as emergency shelter, access to healthcare, water, sanitation, and hygiene supplies, increased access to education, support for livelihoods, COVID-19 support and protection for vulnerable groups, including survivors of gender-based violence, children and adolescents, LGBTQI+ persons, and indigenous people.
You're listening to Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick.
Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister Gaston Brown also addressed the 9th Summit of the Americas, calling for his colleagues on Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba to be included.
He first addressed the diplomatic firestorm hanging over the summit, the exclusion of Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua.
While I'll register my regret that invitations to this 9th Summit of the Americas were not extended to all heads of government, I acknowledge that the crucial issues confronting our global community demand our urgent and collective attention. It is my hope that there will be no future summits to which any head of government of our Americas will be omitted.
In relation to the U.S.'s decades-old embargo on Cuba, the Prime Minister said,
Indeed, we regard the trade embargo against Cuba as harmful to the promotion of peace and prosperity in this hemisphere. It should be ended.
He also urged engagement with Venezuela, a long-standing ally of Caribbean countries, especially since the Petrocaribe initiative by the late Hugo Chavez. With U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken paying rapt attention and taking notes, Prime Minister Brown then outlined the litany of challenges facing the hemisphere and beyond.
One of those is climate change. It was an opportunity to speak directly to the senior leadership of the United States on the issue of compensation for loss and damage.
Our countries have suffered and continue to suffer, even though we are the least contributors to the cause of climate change. This is one of the greatest injustices that exists today, and it requires the attention of the United States and others.
Prime Minister Brown called for genuine international cooperation to address crucial ills which have contributed to a debt crisis for many small states. He says many have borrowed to repair infrastructure damaged by the impact of climate change, and more recently, to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. He says that's why he welcomes President Biden's America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity. However, he has a caveat: it can't come with more debt for Caribbean countries.
I remind, however, that many Caribbean countries have exhausted their borrowing capacity to respond to these exogenous shocks and need debt relief and post-COVID recovery assistance to shore up their tattered economies. Therefore, contracting more debt is not the answer.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Brown also called for cooperation between the US and other governments, such as China, which he says is playing a constructive role throughout Latin America and the Caribbean.
In the areas of infrastructural development and the build-out of renewable resources of energy, collaboration between the US and China could accelerate the pace of economic transformation within our hemisphere.
This suggestion is likely to elicit significant reactions as both countries have been jostling for geopolitical influence. Prime Minister Brown warns both the US and China to cooperate, not compete with each other.
The childhood friend accused of fatally shooting Dominican Republic's Minister of Environment and Natural Resources last week is alleged to have done so because he was denied environmental permits that he was seeking on behalf of companies, according to the judicial documents.
One of the permits that slain former Minister Orlando George had denied and submitted by his longtime friend and now suspect, who served as the intermediary between the companies and the ministry. That particular permit involved a request to export 5,000 tons of used batteries, according to the documents. Those permits and others were found inside a briefcase the suspect was carrying when the minister, who is the son of a former president, was shot 6 times at his office on Monday. The documents state authorities wrote that the suspect was bothered by that particular permit. They also described Cruz, the suspect, as a cold and calculating murderer and are seeking 1 year of preventive prison as investigation continues. Minister George was shot and killed in office on Monday.
Hubbard's Motor Department Mount Gay and Hubbard's Tire Bay, located at the Building Supplies compound in Grand Anse, are reminding the motoring public that another round for licensing and inspection has begun. Just arrived on new shipments of quality furrowed and torque tires to fit all makes and models of vehicles at competitive pricing. Shop early to avoid the hassle of long lines. WhatsApp them on 473-405-5482. Hubbard's. Quality service, affordable prices.
I am Eddie Frederick. This has been Caribbean Perspective, a whole new approach to highlighting developments in the Caribbean. In the meantime, please continue to log on to CaribbeanPerspective.com for more daily news and more.